Hello, ladies and gents. So here we are, last lecture of the semester. This is on Stephen Crane's Maggie. Now, one thing to keep in mind, I know it's a really just miserable, nasty little story. But there's one important thing I want to that I would like you to keep in mind. Remember everything I was saying about dark comedy for the yellow wallpaper? Believe it or not, some parts of this story are supposed to be funny. Maggie, can you believe it? Some parts are supposed to be funny. That's hard to believe. There's just absolutely no room for any kind of light, any kind of happiness, anything like that. And oddly enough, that's where some of the humor is supposed to come in. Let me come at it this way, and I'll be addressing all these other points we talked about in the discussion sections, which, by the way, folks did a really nice job with those. So, good work. I have a good confident feeling as we're heading into the exam that folks kind of get it. So that's good. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is that it requires a little bit of biographical information about Stephen Crane. Crane wrote this story when he was a very, very young man. He was just in college, younger than a lot of folks in our class. He came from a family that was very large and deeply observant Christian family. And so here he is, this young man. He's turned loose on the world. He's experienced his freedom for the first time. Remember when that was like for you, first going off to college or whatever you're doing, and this freedom you feel is just like, man, I can do what I want. So you see what I'm getting at? Crane is, there's a lot of youthful rebelliousness in this story. In other words, he's saying, Mom and Dad, all this stuff you were teaching me about being good and righteous and, practicing good morality and all this other stuff and trying to be your best and trying to look for the good in others. Remember all that crap you were teaching me, Mom and Dad? Well, guess what? I'm experiencing other parts of the world now for the first time that you, Mom and Dad, in your narrow little world never, ever, ever could have imagined. So let me tell you a thing or two about morality. So you see what I'm getting at? There's some youthful rebellion going on in here. And so, a lot of this sort of conventional morality, about the way women were supposed to behave. We talked about all that all semester long. So here's Maggie being a good girl. She's maintains her purity, and she's very beautiful, and she's sweet, and she's domestic, and all these kinds of things. All she's doing is waiting for her Prince Charming, And so you see what I'm getting at? Maggie doing all the things that her mom and that Stephen Crane's mom and dad would approve of. Crane's saying, guess what, Mom and Dad? That kind of garbage gets people killed. Maggie needed to not obey Mom and Dad's morality. Maggie needed to obey a different kind of morality if she's going to survive. Okay? So it sounds like the work of youthful rebellion, doesn't it? And it's supposed to be funny in that regard, right? Haha, Mom and Dad. I think I know something about life that you, who pretended to know so much, couldn't even wrap your brain around. Okay? So there are places through here where I'll try to point out that humor. Okay, nevertheless, this is still very much a work of naturalism. Like in Gilman, like in Jack London, in Stephen Crane's story, we have a very sordid landscape full of violent people engaged in a Darwinian struggle for survival. Critics have also commented a lot of the characters are associated with animalistic imagery, and that was a common theme in naturalism. You scratch the veneer of civilization in us. You scratch beneath that veneer of civilization, and we're just brute savages like the rest of, like any other animal, okay? So, yeah, of course we saw that in Jack London. Well, we see it here also. And as with any other animal, as Darwin would teach us, only those who are best adapted to their environment, only those are the ones who are going to survive. And I don't know why, I just thought of a giraffe. Giraffe, that was my favorite animal, by the way, when I was a little kid, was a giraffe. With our big long necks, right? Okay, they survive because, this is what scientists think. Only these horse-like creatures with really long necks that could eat the food way up in a tree, only those are the ones that are going to survive. So that's why you have these beautiful, funny-looking critters with a really long necks, okay? They were well adapted to survive. So, if we humans, in the final analysis, really ultimately are animals anyway, then we too are utterly dependent on our own ability to adapt to even really bad environments. So, and Crane is thinking that. So we have the Bowery. So who's best adapted to survive the Bowery? I actually went to the Bowery one time. I was there, I think 2 or 3 years ago, actually. All those old tenements, they're all torn down, and they have museums there and things like that now. But it's still kind of a rough area, but nowhere near as bad as it used to be. Okay. So, all right, so this is why, and I think the way I have my discussion set up here, it's kind of in terms of just the different main characters and around the question, who's best suited to survive? And, okay, but before that, I mean, there is a more fundamental question, which is, what's this environment like that they have to survive in? So let's take a quick look at that, the environment. Sort of like in the Yukon and the gold rush. It's pretty freaking awful. And not anyone can survive there, as we saw. And a lot don't survive. And so we see this here. Here's the environment. This is very first page of chapter 1, page 3. From a window of an apartment house that upreared its form from amid squat, ignorant stables, there leaned a curious woman. Some laborers unloading a scow at a dock at the river paused for a moment and regarded the fight. The engineer of a passive tugboat hung lazily to a railing and watched. There were these little kids beating each other bloody, and the adults, they don't even care. Doesn't even faze them. Over on the island, a worm of yellow convicts came from the shadow of a gray, ominous building and crawled slowly along the river's bank. A stone had smashed into Jimmy's mouth. Blood was bubbling over his chin and down his ragged shirt. Oh my gosh, worm of convicts, scow, ominous building. This is a horrible place, and this is all just right on page 1. And so we also have a sense this is the environment that these are Jimmy's formative years. This is what he's up against. Okay. And then so over on page 11, so now you're learning about Jimmy's home and of course Maggie's home and their parents, Mary, etc. right? So this is Jimmy and Maggie's father talking. He's drunk, of course. He always is drunk. They both are. My home's a regular living hell. Damnedest place. Regular hell. Why do I come and drink whiskey here this way? 'Cause home a regular living hell. So, okay. Skip down a few lines. He could hear his mother moving heavily about among the furniture of the room. She was chanting in a mournful voice, occasionally interjecting bursts of volcanic wrath at the father, who Jimmy judged had sunk down on the floor or in a corner. So this is not a good home environment. Both parents are a mess. All the dad can do is get drunk and complain about how the home is a mess, leaving poor Jimmy to fend for himself. And, maybe Jimmy needed some good parental supervision or instruction. Clean him up and love on him a little bit and teach him a little bit. This is a teaching opportunity, right? How to teach Jimmy, to stand up for yourself, but not mess around with people that are going to throw stones and smash your face in. All right. That ain't there. And I think as Ken was pointing out, if I'm not mistaken, Ken was basically saying the children, in fact, are in a parental role to their parents. They're having to take care of their parents. And so everything is just inside out, just a complete mess in this family. Okay, and then so over on page 12, a little bit more. So a glow from the fire threw red hues over the bare floor. Does sound like hell. Sounds like the underworld with fire and brimstone or something, doesn't it? The cracked and soiled plastering and the overturned and broken furniture. In the middle of the floor lay his mother asleep. In one corner of the room, his father's limp body hung across the seat of a chair. This is what this poor kid that just got his face smashed in, this is what he's got to come home to. It's remarkable that he did survive this environment. Well, he did. And then so that leads to the question, what kind of person do you need to grow into in order to survive an environment like that? Okay? Well, someone like Jimmy, and we know what Jimmy turned out to be. Okay, so, and we see this just over in the next chapter, very beginning of chapter 4. We have a big pause. We're going from Jimmy the child to Jimmy the adult. So we get a quick fast forward here. Very beginning of chapter 4. The babe Tommy died. Their little brother Tommy, he died. And then the next paragraph, it says, she and Jimmy lived. Man, doesn't that sound ominous? It's like life and death have been utterly equated there. They're being put on the same plane there, basically, somehow. And which is better off? So this is a wonderful artistic effect that Crane has pulled off here. She and Jimmy lived. And then this is the young man that Jimmy has grown into. He studied human nature in the gutter. And a couple of you pointed out this passage, and that was very good. He studied human nature in the gutter and found it no worse than he thought he had reason to believe it. He never conceived a respect for the world because he had begun with no idols that it had smashed. That's what you need to survive in this world. I mean, what do we say? Set the bar really low. And that's exactly what Jimmy did. He set the bar low for other people. He set the bar low for the quality of life itself. He just had no expectations. He learned to trust nobody, had no use for anything or anyone. Okay, if you start off life that way, you'll never be disappointed, right? But you're not going to grow very much either into a person who has capacity to truly care for yourself and learn to care about others around you. That never had a chance to happen for Jimmy. However, he has learned how to survive, and that's a big deal. Okay, and then so over on page 14 and 15, yeah, a little bit more about who Jimmy grew into here. After a time, his sneer grew so that it turned its glare upon all things. He became so sharp that he believed in nothing. To him, the police were always actuated by malignant impulses, and the rest of the world was composed, for the most part, of despicable creatures who were all trying to take advantage of him, and with whom, in defense, he was obliged to quarrel on all possible occasions. He himself occupied a downtrodden position that had a private but distinct element of grandeur in its isolation. So, yeah, and what we know about the police at this time in New York City, you better believe they were corrupt. So he's learned not to trust the police. He's learned not to trust people around him, and all the while developing a good high opinion of himself. That, he's figured out how to deal with all these untrustworthy people out there, And in his own world, somehow he has managed just fine. If you look down to the bottom of page 15, you see this. He himself could perceive that Providence has caused it clearly to be written that he and his team had the unalienable right. That's language right out of the Declaration of Independence. Someone was talking about the ironic American dream in this story. It may have been Krista, I'm not sure, and that's here. Right? This is language right out of the Declaration of Independence. The unalienable right. This is ironic American pursuit of happiness here and pursuit of the American dream. And this is what I mean. This is where you see I just noticed I'm smiling. I can see myself in the camera, right? So this is Crane's humor coming out. As odd as it is, this is supposed to be funny. The unalienable right to stand in the proper path of the sun chariot, and if they so minded, obstruct its mission or take a wheel off. Okay, you've got to have that kind of arrogance and swagger and meanness. Man, I've got a right to be here, and to hell with the rest of you. That's how you got to be. And ironically, that's very American, as Crane seems to be saying. All right. Okay. Okay, so that's Jimmy. That's his characterization. Now, Pete. Okay, so we get introduced to Pete just on the next page. And the young man he turns into after this fight that we first saw. Okay, yeah. All right, this is at the bottom of page 17, one page into chapter 5, okay? Maggie observed Pete, and we'll be talking about their beautiful love affair shortly, okay? He sat on a table in the Johnson home and dangled his checked legs with an enticing nonchalance. His hair was curled down over his forehead in an oiled bang. His rather pugged nose seemed to revolt from contact with a bristling mustache of short, wire-like hairs. His blue double-breasted coat, edged with black braid, buttoned close to a red puff tie, and his patent leather shoes looked like murder-fitted weapons. Wow, okay, so this man's styling something pretty hard here, right? Okay, and then over on page 18, a little more about Pete. And so now we get to hear what a tough guy he's turned into. Holy gee, They makes me tired, he said. Most every day some farmer comes in and tries to run the shop, see? But they gets trod right out. Oh, that's my best trying to do Pete. I jolt them right out of the street before they knows where they is, see? Sure, said Jimmy. There was a mug come in the place the other day with an idea he was going to own the place. Holy gee, he was going to own the place. I see he had his still on him and I didn't want to give him no stuff, so I says, get the hell out of here and don't make no trouble. Okay, so that's Pete. And clearly he's figured out how to survive, or has he? A lot of you pointed out at the end things don't go well for him. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, and then here's where you see Pete. So Pete's, this tough guy, and he's figured out I managed just fine in the city, so he's a survivor. He's built to survive. And then here's a fun little naturalistic touch here. Look over on page 26. This is subtle, but it's really indicative of naturalism, and it's also supposed to be really funny, okay? So this is page 26. This is chapter 8, 2 pages into chapter 8. So Pete and Mag are just having a lovely, beautiful love affair. They're happy together. They're going out, spending time together and everything. So Pete takes her on a date up to Central Park. And the Central Park Menagerie and the Museum of Fine Arts. Okay, so do you think Pete's going to have any? Maybe you've heard of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That's right there on the edge of Central Park, by the way. Still there, beautiful, world-class museum. Do you think Pete's the kind of guy that's going to have any use for a museum of fine art? No. And yeah, this is funny. This scene is hilarious, drop dead hysterically funny, and I'll show you what I mean. But watch what he does enjoy, okay? All right, let's just take a look here. I'll show you what I mean. Pete, raking his brains for amusement, this is very bottom of 26, discovered the Central Park Menagerie and the Museum of Arts. Sunday afternoons would sometimes find them at these places. Pete did not appear to be particularly interested in what he saw. Whereas Maggie enjoyed it because she's somehow cultivating refinement, but not Pete. Okay, however, watch what happens when they're in the menagerie, which is, basically like a circus or a little zoo. That's all that is, a menagerie. Once at the menagerie, he went into a trance. Watch what Pete really does enjoy, all right? Went into a trance of admiration before the spectacle of a very small monkey, threatening to thrash a cageful because one of them had pulled his tail and he had not wheeled about quickly enough to discover who did it. Ever after, Pete knew that monkey by sight and winked at him. Sorry, that's Pete winking, the best I could do. Trying to induce him to fight with the other larger monkeys. So you get why this is funny, but also very naturalistic. Pete has much more in common with the monkeys than he does the cultivation of fine arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, right? So you see you see what we're getting at. Pete is much more of a monkey than he is a human being. Okay, he's much more animalistic. So you see, this is what Crane and other naturalist writers are trying to say. At our hearts, humans are animals. And these horrific conditions in the Bowery in New York City and other places like the Yukon, etc., is going to draw out what is animalistic within us. Okay, does that make sense? This is why Pete likes the monkeys. Pete has found his best friend. He's Pete is much nicer. I was starting to call Pete a monkey, right? Yeah. Pete seems to have much more in common and seems much happier with that monkey than any other character in this entire book. Okay? All right. I think I made my point. Okay. Okay, so I think blah, blah, blah. Yeah, all right. Okay, tell you what, let me stop there. That's 25 minutes, and we'll say more about Pete's survival and the other characters in part 2. Okay, so stand by and stay tuned.